Hi, I'm Hannah Cole. I'm 33 years old, and my life was pretty simple until my own family tried to tear it apart. Am I taking up too much space? That's what my 6-year-old whispered to me after I came home from the hospital. My heart broke. She clutched her stuffed rabbit, terrified I'd send her back to the orphanage because my own family told her she wasn't real. Before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe and drop a comment to let me know where you are watching from. The hospital doors slid open with a soft hiss, and the fresh, cool air felt like freedom. 3 days. It had only been 3 days, but it felt like a lifetime. The doctors had wanted to keep me for observation due to a complication with the pregnancy, and every minute I was there, my mind was at home. Not just at home, but with my daughter, Leah. My husband, Michael, squeezed my hand, his face etched with relief. "Ready to go home?" he asked, his voice gentle. I nodded, my eyes already scanning the parking lot for my parents' car. They were supposed to be bringing Leah to meet us. My heart did a little flip of anticipation. I missed her so much it felt like a physical ache in my chest. Leaving her with my parents, Margaret and David, and my younger sister, Rachel, had been a last-minute emergency decision. Michael had to work, and they had insisted. "Of course we'll take her," my mother had said over the phone, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "She'll be perfectly fine. You just focus on getting better for the new baby." Even then, a small knot of dread had formed in my stomach. It was a feeling I was used to, a low-level hum of anxiety that always surfaced when my family was involved, especially where Leah was concerned, but I had pushed it down. I had no other choice. When their car finally pulled up, I saw Leah in the back seat, strapped into her booster. My heart swelled. She looked so small, her dark curls bouncing as she stared out the window. I expected her to unbuckle herself the second the car stopped, to burst out and run into my arms like she always did. But she didn't. She just sat there. My sister Rachel got out of the driver's seat, a tight, forced smile on her face. "There you are," she said, as if I'd been inconveniently delayed. "Everything okay?" "I'm fine," I said, my eyes still fixed on Leah. "Leah, honey, Mommy's here." Leah slowly unbuckled her seatbelt. She slid out of the car, clutching her little pink backpack to her chest. It was the one she took for sleepovers, packed with her favorite stuffed rabbit, a change of clothes, and her toothbrush. She didn't run to me. She walked slowly, her eyes on the ground. "Hey, sweet pea," I said, kneeling down despite the slight pull in my abdomen. I opened my arms for a hug. "I missed you so much." Leah stopped a few feet away from me. She looked up, and her eyes, usually so bright and full of life, were dull. She gave me a tiny, hesitant hug, her body stiff in my arms. It wasn't our hug. Our hugs were big, messy, squeeze-you-tight affairs. This was the hug of a stranger. "Did you have fun at Grandma's?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. She just shrugged, her gaze dropping back to her worn sneakers. Michael and I exchanged a worried look over her head. My parents got out of the car, my father giving me a brief, awkward pat on the shoulder while my mother fussed over a loose thread on my sweater. "She's been quiet all morning," my mother offered, as if discussing the weather. "Probably just tired." But I knew my daughter. This wasn't tired. This was something else. This was a wall, built brick by brick over the last 3 days. The car ride home was silent. Leah stared out the window, her backpack firmly on her lap. When we got inside, she walked straight to her room and sat on the edge of her bed. She didn't take off her shoes. She didn't take off her backpack. "Honey, you can put your bag down now." "You're home," I said softly from her doorway. She shook her head, a small, firm gesture. "I want to keep it," Michael tried next. He sat beside her, his big, gentle hands resting on his knees. "Did something happen, Leah?" "You can tell us." She shook her head again, her little chin trembling. "I'm fine." We let it go, hoping she just needed time to adjust. Maybe my hospital stay had scared her more than we realized. We tried to make the rest of the day as normal as possible. We ordered her favorite pizza for dinner. We watched her favorite movie, the one about the singing animals. Through it all, she was a ghost of herself. She ate one slice of pizza without a word. She watched the movie without laughing at her favorite parts. And the backpack never left her side. It sat on the chair next to her at the dinner table. It rested on her lap on the couch. The breaking point came at bedtime. I went into her room to tuck her in. The only light was from her little star-shaped nightlight, casting soft shadows on the walls. She was already under the covers, her small form barely making a lump in the mattress. The pink backpack was on the floor right beside her bed, within arm's reach. I sat on the edge of the bed and stroked her hair. "I love you, sweet pea," I whispered. She didn't answer. She just stared at the ceiling. Her eyes were wide, and in the dim light, I could see they were shimmering with unshed tears. "Leah," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Please tell me what's wrong. For a long moment, there was only the sound of her quiet breathing. I thought she wouldn't answer. I thought the wall she'd built was too high for me to climb. But then, in a voice so small I almost didn't hear it, she spoke. "I'll be good," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'll make space. Please don't send me back." The words hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't breathe. Send her back? Send her back where? To the orphanage? The place I had promised she would never have to see again? The word space echoed in my head, a cold, sharp alarm bell. What? Honey, who said that? I asked, my heart pounding against my ribs. Who told you that? She squeezed her eyes shut, a single tear rolling down her temple and into her hair. She wouldn't say who. She just lay there trembling. I pulled her into my arms, and this time she didn't resist. She collapsed against me, her small body shaking with silent sobs. I held her tight, my mind racing, trying to connect the dots. The coldness in my family's greetings. The way they'd spoken about the new baby. The word space. It was all starting to form a sick, twisted picture in my head. She finally cried herself to sleep in my arms. I gently laid her back on her pillow, pulling the covers up to her chin. Before I left the room, I saw it again. That damned pink backpack standing guard by her bed. It wasn't just a bag. It was a symbol of her fear. She was ready to leave at a moment's notice. She believed with all her 6-year-old heart that her place in this home, in my heart, was temporary, that her love was conditional. I walked out of her room and found Michael in the hallway, his face pale. He had heard everything. He didn't have to say a word. I saw the same fury and heartbreak in his eyes that I felt in my own soul. My family had done this. In just 3 days, they had taken my bright, happy, secure little girl and filled her with the one fear I had spent the last 4 years erasing, the fear of being unwanted. They had poisoned her, and I had let them. I had handed her over, and they had used my trust as a weapon against my own child. The knot in my stomach was no longer just dread. It was a cold, hard stone of rage. To understand the depth of their cruelty, you have to understand my family. Growing up, our home was a stage, and my sister Rachel was the perpetual star. I was the stagehand, the one who made sure the lights were working and the curtains opened on time. No one ever applauded the stagehand. I was born first, the responsible one, the one who got good grades, did her chores without being asked, and never caused any trouble. Rachel came 2 years later, and from the moment she arrived, the balance of the universe shifted. She was the charming one, the pretty one, the one who could throw a screaming tantrum 1 minute and have my parents wrapped around her little finger the next. My achievements were expected. Her efforts were celebrated. I remember 1 year, for my 10th birthday, I asked for a new bicycle. I had been saving my allowance for months to help pay for it. I got a set of encyclopedias. A practical gift for a practical girl, my father had said, patting my head. 2 months later, for Rachel's 8th birthday, she got a pony. A real, live pony that my father boarded at a stable 10 miles away. She rode it twice before deciding it was boring, but for years, my parents would talk about Rachel's pony as if it were a testament to their incredible generosity. This dynamic followed us through school. I'd bring home a report card with straight A's, and my mother would glance at it and say, "That's nice, dear," before sticking it on the fridge without another word. Rachel would come home with a C+ in math, and my parents would throw a mini celebration. "Look, David, she passed. She tried so hard." They took her out for ice cream to reward her effort. I was told my A's were just what was expected of me. No reward was necessary for doing what you were supposed to do. It wasn't just about grades or gifts. It was about attention. It was about value. In their eyes, Rachel's worth was inherent. Mine had to be earned, and even then, it was never quite enough. They paid for her entire college education, the one where she changed her major 3 times and graduated a year late. I worked 2 jobs, pieced together scholarships, and took out student loans to put myself through nursing school. When I graduated with honors, they told me, "Well, it's good you have a sensible career to fall back on." When Rachel graduated with a degree in communications, they threw her a party that cost more than my first car, boasting to everyone about their brilliant, ambitious daughter who was destined for great things. The real test, the moment their favoritism curdled into something uglier, was when I told them I was adopting. I had always known I wanted to be a mother. After years of struggling with infertility, Michael and I decided to adopt. The day we were matched with Leah, a beautiful, tiny 2-year-old with the biggest brown eyes I had ever seen, was the happiest day of my life. I wanted my family to share in that joy. I invited them over for dinner, my hands trembling as I showed them the first picture of Leah. I expected, or at least hoped for, a moment of genuine happiness for me. What I got was a masterclass in passive aggression. My mother stared at the photo, her lips pursed into a thin line. "She's cute," she said, the word hanging in the air, hollow and meaningless. "But are you sure about this, Hannah? It's a big commitment, especially with a child who, has a history." "Her history is that she needs a loving home, Mom," I said, my voice tight. "And we're going to give her one." Rachel smirked from across the table. "It must feel different from having your own, though," she mused, swirling the wine in her glass. "Like, you'll love her, obviously, but it's not the same, is it? Not real family. Real family is about love, Rachel, not blood," Michael interjected, his hand finding mine under the table, but the seed was planted. Over the next few years, their comments became a steady drip of poison. When Leah would have a toddler tantrum, my mother would whisper, "It's probably from her trauma." They never said that when Rachel's daughter, Chloe, threw a fit. When I would post a picture of Leah online, Rachel would comment with something like, "Such a lucky little girl to have you." It sounded nice, but I knew what she meant. Leah was an outsider, a charity case. They plastered on fake smiles for birthdays and holidays, buying Leah gifts that were always slightly less thoughtful, slightly cheaper than the ones they bought for Chloe. They'd praise Chloe for scribbling on a piece of paper, calling her a budding artist. When Leah brought home a painting from preschool that she had worked so hard on, my father would glance at it and say, "Oh, that's nice," before changing the subject. They never called her their granddaughter. It was always Hannah's little girl or Leah, but Chloe was always our beautiful granddaughter. The distinction was a small, sharp knife, twisting a little deeper with each passing year. I tried to protect Leah from it. I made sure our home was a fortress of love and security. Michael was a wonderful father, and Leah blossomed. She was a happy, confident, loving child who knew without a doubt that she was wanted. She was ours, and we were hers. But my family, they never truly saw her. They saw a placeholder. They saw my failure to produce a biological child. In their eyes, Leah wasn't a real part of the family tree. She was a grafted branch, and they were always waiting for a storm to snap it off. I saw the way they looked at her, the slight hesitation before a hug, the way their smiles never quite reached their eyes, and I tolerated it. I told myself it was their problem, not mine. I told myself that as long as Leah felt loved by me and Michael, that was all that mattered. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I had underestimated their capacity for cruelty. I thought their poison was a slow-acting one, something I could counteract with my own love. I never imagined they would take a syringe full of it and inject it directly into my daughter's heart the moment my back was turned. Discovering I was pregnant felt like a miracle. After years of being told it was impossible, after accepting it and building my family through a different, beautiful path, here it was. A tiny, fluttering heartbeat on an ultrasound screen. Michael and I were overjoyed. We were also nervous. Our biggest concern was how Leah would feel. We wanted to make sure she knew that this new baby wasn't a replacement, but an addition, an expansion of our love. We told Leah first. We sat her down and explained that she was going to be a big sister. Her face lit up with a kind of pure, unadulterated joy that could power a small city. She immediately started making plans. She would teach the baby how to build block towers, how to sing the alphabet song, how to cuddle with her stuffed rabbit. There was no jealousy, no fear, only excitement. She was going to be a big sister, and it was the most important job in the world. Buoyed by her reaction, I thought, foolishly, that maybe my family would finally see us as complete. Maybe a biological grandchild would finally bridge the gap. Maybe they would finally accept Leah, seeing her as the beloved older sister to their real grandchild. The hope was a fragile, stupid thing, but it flickered inside me. We invited them over for Sunday dinner to share the news. The afternoon was tense, filled with the usual undercurrents. My mother commented on the dust on a bookshelf. Rachel complained about her job while scrolling through her phone, ignoring both Leah and her own daughter Chloe, who were playing on the floor. After we ate, Michael clinked his glass. "We have some exciting news to share," he said, beaming. I took a deep breath and placed a hand on my still flat stomach. "I'm pregnant," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're all going to be grandparents and an aunt again. And Leah is going to be a big sister." For a moment, there was silence. My father managed a weak smile. "Well, congratulations," he said, his voice lacking any real warmth. Rachel looked up from her phone, her expression unreadable, but it was my mother's reaction that sucked the air out of the room. She didn't smile. Her eyes flickered from my stomach to Leah, who was sitting beside me, vibrating with excitement. A strange, cold look passed over her face. "Well," she said, her voice flat and sharp, "at least you'll finally have a real child. The word real hung in the air, ugly and sharp. It was a slap in the face. It wasn't just an insult to me. It was an erasure of my daughter. It told Leah, in no uncertain terms, that she was a counterfeit. My heart shattered. I looked at Leah, praying she hadn't understood. But she had. Her smile faltered. Her little shoulders slumped. She looked down at her lap, suddenly small and quiet. Michael's hand tightened around mine. I could feel the anger radiating off him. "Margaret," he said, his voice dangerously low. "What an awful thing to say." My mother waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, don't be so sensitive. You know what I mean?" Before I could find my voice, Rachel chimed in, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. She looked directly at Leah. "The baby will need space," she said, her tone light and breezy, as if she were discussing redecorating. That girl should get used to being second. That was it. The hope I had foolishly held on to was extinguished. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a statement of fact as far as they were concerned. The new baby was legitimate. Leah was not. The rest of the dinner was a blur of forced conversation and stomach-churning anger. I couldn't eat. I couldn't speak. All I could think about were the two sentences that had just defined my family's view of my daughter. They weren't just thoughts. They were weapons. And I had just learned how casually my family was willing to use them. Weeks later, when I was rushed to the hospital, I had no choice but to leave Leah with them. I was scared and in pain, and my judgment was clouded. I thought for 3 days they could at least pretend. They could be decent. I told myself that the things they said were just words, born of ignorance. I never imagined they would take those exact words and systematically use them to terrorize a 6-year-old child. I pieced it together later, from the little things Leah let slip over the following weeks, and from the cold, hard logic of what she had whispered to me that first night. I can picture it so clearly. Leah, in a strange house without me, already feeling scared and alone, and my sister Rachel seeing her chance. "Your mommy is having a real baby now," I imagine her saying, leaning down to look Leah in the eye. "A baby that grew in her tummy. That makes it special." I can see her walking Leah past the spare bedroom. "This will have to be the baby's room. It's bigger than yours. The baby will need a lot of space. Where are you going to put all your toys?" And then, the final horrific blow, delivered with a smug smile. The words that would become my daughter's nightmare. "You know, when there's not enough room, sometimes people have to make hard choices. You need to learn how to make space for the real children, or back to the orphanage you go." She had said it. She had threatened my child with her deepest fear. She had told her that my love was finite, that our home had a capacity limit, and that she was the first one who would be thrown out to make room. My mother and father? They would have stood by and let it happen. They would have called it preparing her for the new reality. They didn't see it as cruelty. They saw it as putting Leah in her proper place. Second, an afterthought. Temporary. They hadn't just said shattering words. They had taken a hammer and brought it down on my daughter's sense of security, on her heart, on the very foundation of the life I had promised her. The days that followed were the hardest of my life. My home, once a sanctuary of laughter and warmth, felt like a minefield of unspoken fear. Leah's silence was a constant screaming presence. The pink backpack was her shadow. She wore it from the moment she woke up until the moment I managed to coax her into bed. She'd place it carefully on the floor beside her, always within reach, as if an alarm might go off in the middle of the night, signaling her eviction. Michael and I tried everything. We tried to be gentle. We tried to be direct. "Honey, you know this is your forever home, right?" I'd say, my voice aching with a need for her to believe me. She would nod, a tiny, unconvincing movement. "I know," but her actions told a different story. She started making space. She quietly moved all her toys to one small corner of her room, leaving the rest of the floor bare. At the dinner table, she would sit perfectly straight, her hands in her lap, taking up as little room as possible. She stopped asking for bedtime stories. She stopped asking for piggyback rides. She was trying to become invisible, to shrink herself down so no one would notice she was taking up space that might be needed for the real baby. The happy, boisterous little girl I knew was gone, replaced by this quiet, haunted child. Every time I looked at her, my rage at my family burned hotter. They had done this. They had stolen my daughter's light. One afternoon, about a week after I came home, I found her in her room, carefully packing the pink backpack. She was folding her favorite pajamas, the ones with the smiling dinosaurs, and placing them inside. Next to them, she tucked her stuffed rabbit, its ears flopping sadly. "What are you doing, sweet pea?" I asked softly from the doorway. She jumped, startled, and quickly tried to hide the bag behind her back. "Nothing," she said, her eyes wide with panic. "I'm just playing?" "Leah, I said, walking over and sitting on the floor in front of her. I took her small hands in mine. You don't have to play like this. You are not going anywhere, ever. This is your home. Her face crumpled. The dam she had so carefully constructed finally broke. But Aunt Rachel said, she wailed, the words tumbling out on a wave of frantic sobs. She said you were getting a real baby. She said I had to make space. She said you'd send me back. The full, ugly truth, spoken in her own trembling voice, was 1,000 times worse than I had imagined. I pulled her onto my lap, and she buried her face in my shoulder, her little body shaking with the force of her grief. She cried for everything she had been holding in, for the fear, for the confusion, for the casual cruelty that had been inflicted upon her. She's a liar. Leah, I whispered into her hair, my own tears streaming down my face. Aunt Rachel is a liar, and Grandma and Grandpa were wrong to let her say that. This baby is not more real than you. You are my daughter. You are my daughter first. You will always be my daughter. We sat on the floor for what felt like hours, just holding each other. I rocked her back and forth, murmuring every reassurance I could think of. I told her the baby would be lucky to have her as a big sister. I told her that our love doesn't get divided. It multiplies. I told her she was the best thing that ever happened to me. That night, as I tucked her into bed, she looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. The fear was still there, a lingering shadow, but something else was there too, a tiny flicker of hope. I'll be small, Mommy, she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. I promise. My heart broke all over again. It wasn't a tantrum or a plea. It was a bargain, a 6-year-old trying to negotiate her own worth. She was promising to shrink, to diminish herself, to prove she deserved to stay. I leaned down and kissed her forehead, my hand stroking her cheek. No, sweet pea, I said, my voice thick with emotion. You don't have to be small. I want you to be big. I want you to take up all the space you want. This house is yours. This family is yours. You fill up every room just by being in it. Don't you ever think you need to be small for anyone. She finally fell into a restless sleep. I watched her for a long time, the moonlight tracing a silver line across her face. The image of my bright, confident daughter replaced by this fragile, frightened child was seared into my brain. The love I felt for her was a fierce, protective inferno. And in that moment, the grief and the heartbreak inside me began to cool, hardening into something else. It was resolve, a cold, silent, and absolute resolve. There would be no more second chances, no more excuses, no more pretending their toxic behavior was just a misunderstanding. They had declared war on my child. They had drawn a line between real and not real, and I knew, with chilling certainty, that I was about to make them regret it. They wanted space? Fine. I was about to give them an entire universe of it. Here are the remaining parts of the story. I sat there, the cold, smooth surface of the manager's desk, a stark contrast to the fire churning in my stomach. My father, Gerald, was in his element, his voice a low, confident hum as he explained the necessity of these documents. He used words like streamline, protect, and simplify. To anyone listening, he sounded like the most caring father in the world, a man simply trying to ease the burdens of his ailing daughter. Elaine sat beside him, a statue of serene support, her hand resting on his arm, her eyes occasionally flicking toward me with a look that was part concern, part warning. They were a perfect team, their performance polished from years of practice. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Every beat seemed to echo in the cavernous silence of the bank lobby. I could feel the sweat prickling at my hairline and the dampness on my palms as I clutched my purse. Inside that purse was my weapon, a small folded piece of paper that felt as heavy as a brick. For the last 3 days, that note had been my secret, my talisman. I had written it in the dead of night, propped up in my bed, the surgical incision in my side sending a dull ache through my body with every movement. My hand had been shaking, not from weakness, but from a terrifying, exhilarating surge of adrenaline. I'd chosen the words carefully, writing them on a torn piece of a utility bill with a blue pen my mother had given me years ago. It was a cheap pen, the kind that came in a pack of 10, but it was one of the few things of hers I still had. Help, under pressure, fraud. 3 words. Simple, direct. There was no room for misinterpretation. I folded it twice, creasing it sharply, so it was no bigger than a postage stamp. It was small enough to hide, but powerful enough to burn a hole in my pocket. This was it. This was the culmination of years of quiet desperation, of swallowing my own voice to keep a fragile peace that only ever benefited them. My father pushed the stack of papers closer to me. "Just here, Emma," he said, tapping a yellow sticky arrow pointing to a signature line. And here. There were at least a dozen of them, each one a lock on a cage they were building around me. Elaine leaned in, her perfume a cloying, sweet scent that made me feel sick. "It will all be over in a minute, dear," she whispered, her voice like honey laced with poison. "Then we can go get a nice lunch. You must be tired." Tired wasn't the word. I was exhausted down to my soul, but I was also awake in a way I hadn't been for years. The surgery had been a wake-up call. Lying in that hospital bed, I had hours to do nothing but think. I replayed every conversation. Every time my father had said, "Let me handle that for you. You're not well enough." I saw every condescending smile from Elaine, every time she'd patted my hand and said, "Your father knows best." They had used my grief after my mother's death, and now my physical recovery, as tools to chip away at my independence until I was a child again, completely dependent on their goodwill. And their goodwill was running out. It was time. I took a slow, deliberate breath, trying to steady my trembling hands. I reached into my purse, my fingers fumbling for a moment before closing around my wallet and a folded deposit slip. Tucked inside the deposit slip was the note. I pulled them out, keeping them low below the edge of the desk, out of my father's line of sight. "I just need to deposit this check first," I said, my voice sounding surprisingly steady, though my throat felt like sandpaper. I placed my driver's license on the desk, then the deposit slip on top of it, and as I did, I let the folded note slide out from underneath, positioning it right next to my ID. It was a gamble, a huge one. It was small, inconspicuous. My father focused only on the legal documents, didn't even glance at it. His eyes were fixed on the pen in his hand, which he was now trying to press into mine, but the branch manager, Ms. Julia Brooks, saw it. I watched her face, searching for any sign, any flicker of understanding. She was in her late 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an expression that gave nothing away. For a terrifying second, her gaze passed over the note without registering it, and my hope plummeted. My father was getting impatient. "Emma, the deposit can wait. Let's get this done. The manager is a busy woman." He was right. She was busy. Her eyes, which had been scanning the documents he'd brought, suddenly darted back down to my ID. They stopped. They lingered for no more than a second on the tiny folded paper beside it. I saw her pupils dilate just slightly, a subtle intake of breath. Her professional mask didn't slip, not even for an instant, but I knew. She had seen it. She had read the bold, desperate letters I had scrawled. A wave of relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy washed over me. I hadn't realized I was holding my breath until it came out in a shaky, silent exhale. Ms. Brooks picked up my ID, the deposit slip, and, with a deft movement of her fingers, the note, shielding it from view with her other hand. "Of course, Miss Collins. Let me just process this for you," she said, her voice even and pleasant. She turned to her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard. To my father and Elaine, it looked like she was processing a simple deposit. They relaxed, smiling at each other, thinking the final hurdle had been cleared. They thought they were seconds away from victory. They had no idea that the game had just changed. They couldn't see the screen where Ms. Brooks wasn't processing a deposit. She was typing a silent, urgent message into the bank's internal security chat system. They didn't see her foot gently press a small, discreet button under her desk. They only saw a competent, efficient bank manager doing her job. But I saw a lifeline. I saw the woman who had just read my hidden note, and without a single word had chosen to believe me. The moments that followed felt stretched, each second elongating into a minute. My father cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense quiet. He readjusted his tie, a nervous habit I recognized from my childhood, one that only appeared when he felt his control was absolute, and he was enjoying the spectacle. Elaine, for her part, had resumed her pose of placid superiority, her lips curved into a gentle, knowing smile. They were waiting for Ms. Brooks to finish the formality of my deposit so they could proceed with the financial execution they had planned. Ms. Brooks finished typing. She swiveled in her chair, her expression still perfectly neutral. She handed my ID back to me, but held onto the deposit slip and the hidden note, placing them discreetly on a tray beside her keyboard. "All right, that's all set," she said smoothly. Then she looked at the stack of legal documents my father had so proudly presented. She picked up the top page, her eyes scanning it with an unnerving focus. "Mr. Collins," she began, her tone shifting from pleasant customer service to something more serious, more official. "A transfer of assets of this complexity, especially involving a power of attorney, requires a bit more privacy than we can afford out here in the lobby." My father beamed, puffing out his chest. Of course. Whatever you need." He saw this as a sign of respect, an acknowledgement of the importance of his transaction. He thought she was rolling out the red carpet for him. "Why don't we step into my office?" Ms. Brooks suggested, standing up. "We can go over everything comfortably in there." "An excellent idea," Elaine chimed in, rising gracefully. She placed her hand on the small of my back, a gesture that looked supportive but was really a firm, insistent push, guiding me forward. The walk to her office was the longest 20 feet of my life. The glass-walled office stood at the back of the branch, a fishbowl of authority. With every step, my legs felt heavier, my breathing shallower. Was I walking into a sanctuary or a more secluded trap? I could feel Elaine's fingers pressing into my spine, a constant reminder of their presence, their power. My father walked beside Ms. Brooks, already making small talk about the stock market, trying to establish himself as a peer, a man of substance. I was just the silent, sickly cargo they were moving from one place to another. Ms. Brooks held the door open, and we filed inside. The office was neat and impersonal, dominated by a large mahogany desk. Framed certificates and degrees hung on the wall, testaments to her competence. A small, healthy-looking succulent sat on the corner of her desk, a lone splash of life in the sterile environment. The heavy door clicked shut behind us, and the muffled sounds of the bank lobby disappeared. The silence in the room was absolute, profound. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the space. "Please have a seat," Ms. Brooks said, gesturing to 2 chairs in front of her desk for my father and Elaine. Then she turned to me. "Ms. Collins, would you be more comfortable over here?" She indicated a chair that was set slightly apart, closer to her side of the desk. It was a subtle but brilliant move. It physically separated me from them, breaking their united front. I moved to the chair she offered, a small island of my own, and sank into it gratefully. For the first time all day, Elaine's hand wasn't on me. "Now," Ms. Brooks said, settling into her own chair. She folded her hands on the desk and looked directly at my father. "Could you please walk me through the purpose of these documents? I see a comprehensive power of attorney, a transfer of deed for a property, and authorizations to liquidate several investment portfolios. It's quite a significant restructuring of your daughter's estate." My father launched into his well-rehearsed speech. He spoke of my fragile health, my inability to cope with stress after the surgery, and his paternal desire to protect my legacy. He painted a picture of me as a helpless child, overwhelmed by the complexities of modern finance. Elaine nodded along, interjecting with soft murmurs of agreement. "He's been so worried about her," she'd say, dabbing at a non-existent tear in her eye. I sat in silence, my hands clenched into fists in my lap, digging my nails into my palms. Hearing them talk about me as if I weren't even in the room, as if I were an object to be managed, sent a familiar surge of helpless anger through me. But I remembered the look Ms. Brooks had given me. I had to trust her. I had to stay quiet and let her work. Ms. Brooks listened patiently, her face a mask of professional interest. She asked a few clarifying questions, each one seemingly innocent but designed to poke holes in their story. "So this power of attorney would be effective immediately? And it's irrevocable?" she asked. "Yes, it's for the best. It simplifies things," my father said, a little too quickly. "I see," Ms. Brooks said, making a note on a pad. The pen scratched loudly in the quiet room. Then she created her opening. With a small, seemingly accidental movement, she nudged a pen holder on her desk. A half-dozen pens clattered to the floor, scattering on the carpet near my feet. "Oh, clumsy me," she said with a small, apologetic smile. She stood up and came around the desk, ostensibly to pick them up. My father and Elaine watched her, their expressions a mixture of annoyance and condescension. As Ms. Brooks bent down, her back was to them. She was right beside my chair. She gathered the pens, and as her hand came up, she discreetly slid the notepad she'd been writing on onto my lap. Shielded from their view by the bulk of the desk, a single question was written in neat, block letters. "Are you signing willingly?" Beneath it were 2 boxes, yes and no. My heart hammered against my chest. This was it, the moment of truth. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold the pen she had left on the pad. I looked up. Elaine was watching me, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Is everything all right, dear?" she asked, her voice sharp. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, trying to look confused and tired. I bent over slightly, as if to help Ms. Brooks with the pens on the floor. Under the cover of the desk, I used the pen to put a thick, dark X in the box next to the word "No, Ms." Brooks collected the last of the pens in the notepad in one smooth motion. As she straightened up, she gave my shoulder a brief, reassuring squeeze. It was a gesture so fleeting and natural that my father and Elaine wouldn't have thought twice about it. But to me, it was a silent promise, I've got you. She returned to her seat, her composure flawless. Thank you, Emma, she said warmly, as if I had genuinely helped her. She placed the notepad back on her desk, the marked page now facing her. All right, where were we? Yes. Mr. Collins, for a transaction of this magnitude, Standard Bank protocol requires a secondary verification from our regional compliance office. It's just a formality to protect all parties involved, she explained, her voice a calm, steady drone of corporate procedure. She picked up her phone. It should only take a moment. Please, make yourselves comfortable. My father's smile tightened at the edges. A delay. He hated delays. Is that really necessary? He asked, his tone laced with irritation. It is, Ms. Brooks said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Bank policy. She dialed an extension, and the quiet clicks of the buttons seemed to echo off the walls. She began to speak in a low, professional voice, using acronyms and banking jargon that I didn't understand. But I knew she wasn't talking to a compliance officer. She was executing the final step of her plan. The calm was over. The storm was about to arrive. The air in the office grew thick and heavy. My father's foot began a frantic, rhythmic tapping on the floor, the only sound in the room besides the low murmur of Ms. Brooks's voice on the phone. Elaine's serene mask had been replaced by a pinched, impatient expression. They exchanged a look, a silent conversation of annoyance and growing suspicion. This was not going according to their script. They were used to people folding before their authority, not being put on hold by bank policy. Ms. Brooks finished her call. She placed the receiver back in its cradle with a soft click. My apologies for the delay, she said, her gaze sweeping over the three of us. The compliance team is just verifying the notary seal on these documents. It seems to be from an out-of-state registry, which adds an extra step. My father stiffened. The notary is a personal friend. Impeccable, he snapped, his voice sharp. He knew and I knew that the notary was a lie. The seal was a high-quality forgery, something he'd bragged about acquiring years ago for emergency business matters. Just as he finished speaking, there was a quiet, firm knock on the office door. Ms. Brooks didn't seem surprised. Come in, she called out. The door opened, and two uniformed police officers stepped inside. They were large men, their presence immediately shrinking the already small office. They didn't look aggressive, just calm and observant, their eyes taking in the scene, the scattered legal documents on the desk, my father and Elaine frozen in their chairs, and me, huddled in my seat by the wall. A bank security guard stood just behind them in the doorway. The shift in the room was instantaneous and absolute. All pretense of a normal family transaction evaporated. This was now something else entirely. Elaine gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Officers? What on earth is going on? She asked, her voice trembling with manufactured shock. My father's face had gone from irritated to a deep, mottled red. He shot to his feet. What is the meaning of this? He boomed, directing his fury at Ms. Brooks. This is a private family matter. One of the officers held up a hand. Sir, I'm going to need you to sit down and remain calm, he said, his voice polite but unyielding. My father hesitated, his jaw working, but something in the officer's steady gaze made him slowly, reluctantly sink back into his chair. Ms. Brooks remained the calm center of the storm. She stood up and turned to me. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear and carried across the silent room, directed at me but intended for everyone. Ms. Collins, she began, I am going to ask you a few questions in the presence of these officers. I need you to answer honestly. Please know that you are in a safe place. I looked from her face to my father's. His eyes were burning into me, full of rage and a silent, desperate command. Don't you dare. I saw Elaine's expression, which had morphed into a venomous glare. They thought they could still control me with fear. For my entire life it had worked. But sitting there, with the quiet strength of Ms. Brooks beside me and the institutional authority of the police officers in the room, the fear began to recede. It was replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I straightened my back and met Ms. Brooks's gaze. I nodded. Emma, are you here today of your own free will? She asked. My father started to speak. Of course she is. But the officer cut him off with a sharp, Sir, let her answer. All eyes were on me. The weight of my entire life, of my future, felt pressed into this single moment. My throat was so tight I could barely breathe, but I forced the word out. No, I whispered. It was barely audible, but in the dead silence of that office, it was a gunshot. Ms. Brooks continued, her voice steady. And these documents, she said, tapping the stack on her desk. Do you understand what they are? Do you wish to sign them and transfer control of your property and finances to your father, Gerald Collins? This time my voice was stronger. I looked directly at my father, At the man who was supposed to protect me, who had instead tried to devour me. "No," I said loud and clear. "I do not wish to sign them. They are trying to take everything from me." The room erupted. "She's lying," Elaine shrieked, jumping to her feet. "She's not well. She's been confused ever since her surgery. We're just trying to help her." My father lunged forward, his face contorted in a mask of fury. "You ungrateful girl. After everything I've done for you," he roared, trying to get to me. The second officer immediately stepped between us, placing a firm hand on my father's chest, easily holding him back. "I think you've said enough, sir," the officer said, his voice dropping to a low growl. While the officers dealt with my father and Elaine's frantic denials, Ms. Brooks calmly addressed the head of bank security. "Please confirm with our fraud department," she said, holding up one of the documents. "The notary seal, registry number 7B419. We have reason to believe it is fraudulent." That was the final blow. The accusation of coercion was one thing. They could try to argue that away as a family misunderstanding. But a forged notary seal was a federal crime. It was cold, hard, undeniable proof of their intent. The fight went out of them in an instant. Elaine's feigned hysterics ceased, replaced by a pale, slack-jawed shock. My father stopped struggling against the officer, his blustering rage collapsing into a wheezing, defeated silence. They stared at the documents on the desk as if seeing them for the first time, not as tools of their victory, but as the instruments of their downfall. The truth was finally exposed, not in a shouting match, but under the cold. Bright lights of a bank office laid bare by a quiet woman with a pen and a protocol. The elaborate lies they had constructed for years had been dismantled in less than 10 minutes. They had walked in as powerful, respectable guardians. They would be walking out as common criminals. The scene that followed was surreal. There was no dramatic confrontation, no shouting match that echoed through the bank. It was a quiet, methodical process of dismantling my father and Elaine's lives. One of the officers began to speak to them in a low, calm voice, explaining their rights as he placed them in handcuffs. The metallic click of the cuffs locking into place was a sharp, final sound that cut through the thick tension in the room. Elaine began to weep, not the performative sobs of a concerned stepmother, but the thin, pathetic whimpers of someone who had been caught. My father was silent, his face ashen, his eyes vacant. He looked smaller, older, stripped of the arrogance and authority that had been his armor for as long as I could remember. They were led out of the office. The walk through the main lobby was their walk of shame. The bank had fallen quiet, every customer and teller frozen, watching the spectacle. The respectable Mr. Collins, a man known in our small town for his confidence and business acumen, was being escorted out by police, his head bowed. I stood in the doorway of Ms. Brooks's office and watched them go. I felt no triumph, no surge of victorious joy, just a deep, hollow ache and a profound sense of release. Like a heavy weight I'd been carrying for decades had finally been lifted from my shoulders. As they reached the glass doors of the bank, my father stopped. He turned and looked back, his eyes finding mine across the lobby. His face was a twisted mask of fury, humiliation, and something that looked shockingly like self-pity. "You did this," he mouthed, his voice a hoarse, venomous whisper that I couldn't hear but understood perfectly. "Family is supposed to take care of family. You betrayed me." For a moment, the old fear flickered inside me. The ingrained instinct to apologize, to smooth things over, to take the blame just to make the conflict stop. But then I looked past him, at the sunlight streaming through the doors, at the world outside that he had tried to lock me away from, and I found my strength. I took a step forward, out of the shadow of the office. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I met his gaze and spoke with a clarity that came from the very core of my being. "Real family doesn't steal," I said, my voice steady and clear. "You taught me that lesson the hard way." His face crumpled. He had no response. The officers gently nudged him forward, and he disappeared through the doors, out of the bank, and out of my life. The lobby slowly stirred back to life, the whispers and stares following the police car as it pulled away from the curb. Ms. Brooks came to my side and gently guided me back into the sanctuary of her office. Shutting the door on the curious eyes of the outside world, she handed me a bottle of water, her movements calm and reassuring. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice soft with genuine concern. I sank into the chair, the adrenaline that had been coursing through me finally draining away, leaving me weak and trembling. "I will be," I said, my voice shaky. "Thank you. You saved me. You saved yourself, Emma," she corrected me gently. "That note took more courage than you know. All I did was my job." The hours that followed were a blur of logistics. Ms. Brooks was incredibly efficient. She immediately put a freeze on every account that my father had access to. We went through my entire financial portfolio, changing passwords, adding security questions, and setting up alerts that would come directly to my phone. For every lock my father had installed to control my life, she provided me with a key. She explained the legal process that would follow. The fraudulent documents were now evidence. The police had taken my statement. My father and Elaine were facing serious charges: fraud, attempted theft, coercion. It was likely they would try to pressure me to drop the charges, to paint it as a family dispute. "You don't owe them anything," Ms. Brooks told me firmly, looking me in the eye. "You don't owe them a phone call, a visit, or your forgiveness. Your only responsibility now is to yourself and your recovery." As she spoke, I realized the true nature of my revenge. It wasn't about seeing my father in handcuffs. It wasn't about watching Elaine's perfect facade crumble. My revenge was quiet. It was in the calm, competent way Ms. Brooks helped me reclaim my financial independence. It was in the changing of a password, the signing of a form that put my name, and my name alone, back in control. It was in the simple, powerful act of taking back what was mine. The loudest, most satisfying victory wasn't my father's downfall. It was the quiet beginning of my own life, a life free from the suffocating weight of his control. Before leaving the bank, I made one phone call. "Daniel?" I said, my voice cracking with emotion when my brother answered. "I need you. Can you come to my house?" "I'm on my way," he said, no questions asked. The unwavering loyalty in his voice was the first brick in the foundation of my new life. The quiet revenge was realizing I wasn't alone after all. When I finally got home, the house felt different. It was the same four walls, the same furniture my mother had picked out years ago, but the oppressive atmosphere that had lingered for so long felt lighter, as if a window had been opened in a sealed room. Daniel was already there, his car parked in the driveway. The moment I walked through the door, he wrapped me in a fierce hug. He didn't say much at first, just held on, letting me know he was there. "I'm so proud of you," he finally whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I always knew you were strong, Em. I just don't think you knew it." He was right. For years, I had mistaken my silence for weakness. I had let my father and Elaine define me as fragile, incapable, and dependent. The truth was, I had been silently enduring, silently observing, and in the end, silently planning. The first thing we did was call a locksmith. The sound of the drill biting into the old locks was cathartic, each turn of the screw a definitive severing of the past. As the locksmith installed new heavy-duty deadbolts, Daniel and I started on the monumental task of disentangling my life from my father's. We went into the small home office he had set up for himself, the nerve center of his control over my finances. For hours, we sorted through file cabinets filled with my documents, bank statements, investment reports, property deeds, and as we dug deeper, the full scope of his deception became clear. It wasn't just this one grand attempt to steal everything. It was 1,000 smaller thefts over the years, skimmed interest payments, management fees he paid to himself from my accounts, dividends that were redirected into accounts I never knew existed. He had been slowly bleeding me dry for years, all while telling me he was protecting me. Each document was a fresh betrayal, a paper cut to the soul. But with Daniel by my side, the pain was manageable. He was furious on my behalf, his anger a shield that protected me from sinking into despair. "We'll fix this," he said, his voice a low, steady promise. Every penny. A few days later, sitting at my own kitchen table, the same table where my father had tried to pressure me into signing my life away, I took out a piece of paper and a pen. I needed one final act of closure, not for him, but for me. I wrote a letter, not to the man in the jail cell, but to the father he should have been. "Dad, for years, I let you convince me that I was weak, and that your control was a form of love. I know now that control is not love. It's fear. I think you were afraid. Afraid of me living a life that you couldn't manage. A life that was truly my own. The court will handle the legal matters. The banks will handle the financial ones. This letter is for the personal ones. I am not writing this out of anger, but out of a need to finally close this chapter. I forgive you. Not for what you did, but for who you are. I forgive you so that I no longer have to carry the weight of your choices. You will not be a part of my life anymore. This is goodbye." I folded the letter, sealed it in an envelope, and put it away in a drawer. I would never send it. I didn't need to. The act of writing it was enough. The months that followed were a quiet period of rebuilding. With the help of Daniel and a good lawyer, I slowly recovered most of the money my father had siphoned away. I sold the house, letting go of the painful memories it held, and bought a small condo in a new part of town, a place that was entirely mine. I reconnected with old friends I had been isolated from. I started taking a pottery class, something I'd always wanted to do but had been told was a messy waste of time. My hands, which had once trembled with fear as I signed my name, were now steady as they shaped clay on a spinning wheel, creating something new, something beautiful, something of my own. I had lunch with Julia Brooks a few times. She became more than just a bank manager. She was a mentor, a friend who had seen me at my lowest and helped me find my strength. She told me the bank had implemented new training protocols based on my case, teaching tellers and managers how to spot the subtle signs of elder and dependent adult financial abuse. My quiet note had ended up having a very loud impact. My life isn't loud or dramatic now. It's peaceful. It's filled with small joys, the morning sun in my new kitchen, a phone call with my brother, the satisfaction of paying my own bills from an account that only I control. I learned that my father was wrong. I wasn't weak or incapable. I was just quiet. And sometimes the quietest people have the most to say when they finally decide to speak. And to you watching, I want to ask, what would you have done in my place? Sometimes the biggest battles aren't fought with shouts and screams, but with a hidden note, a quiet no, and the courage to trust a stranger. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more stories, and share this with someone who needs to be reminded that sometimes the quietest voice can be the most powerful one of all.